Okay, this is church history in 5 minutes. I'll put a little clock up here to keep myself accountable. Alright, start the clock. The start of the apostolic period is marked by the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, somewhere in the vicinity of 33 AD. A little while later, we get Pentecost in Jerusalem, the disciples receive the Holy Spirit, and thousands come to Christ. On the way to the city of Damascus, Saul is miraculously converted, and so stunned is he by the event that he forgets how to spell and is known hereafter as Paul. More significantly, he becomes an apostle and takes the gospel to the Gentiles. Okay, now to the post-apostolic period, where we see some serious persecution begin. Emperor Nero felt a bit hot under the collar because he had a beard which only went under his chin, and also because the Great Fire of Rome was blamed upon him in 64 AD. So naturally, he passed the blame to those he despised and wanted to get rid of, those now called Christians at the time. He did a whole lot of terrible things to them, which I won't draw in my bad sketchy style for fear of trivializing them. Notable early bishops of this period include Polycarp of Smyrna, not to be confused with Magikarp of Pokemon, Clement, Irenaeus, Ignatius of Antioch, Tertullian, and Justin Martyr. And these lovely bearded and haloed fellows are called the early church fathers. They were key in setting up the church and holding it to true faith and identifying the early canon. All the bishops were martyred. Now to late antiquity, which Wikipedia tells me just means very old, so now to the late very old times. We get Emperor Constantine as the first Christian emperor of Rome in 312 AD, who stops the persecution of the church. He also summoned the Council of Nicaea, the first ecumenical council, to deal with the Arian controversy. But they did some other good stuff, like issue the Nicene Creed. Athanasius of Alexandria was a key dude in the Arian controversy, and was the old school version of those kids who get expelled from every school. He was exiled 5 times by 4 different emperors. Impressive. In the middle of the 4th century, we have the Cappadocian Fathers, namely Basil the Great, Basil's brother Gregory of Nyssa, not to be confused with his close friend and fellow Cappadocian father Gregory of Nazianzus. These guys lived in the region of modern-day Turkey and advanced development of some early church theology, like the doctrine of the Trinity. In 451, we get the Council of Chalcedon, a highly influential council that had some intense Christological debates which were to prove divisive for the plate smashers and toga wearers, that is the Eastern or Greek church based in Constantinople and the Western or Latin church based in Rome. Okay, we need to pick things up a bit.
The early Middle Ages, we get a lot of missionary activity into modern Scotland, Ireland and Wales from Roman Britain. Some of the prominent missions were St. Patrick, Columba and Columbanus, and Augustine of Canterbury. Southern Britain became a missionary centre with such missions as Wilfrid, Willibrord, Lullas and Boniface heading over to Germania. The High Middle Ages saw the development of the monastery and the reach of Christianity across Europe. Naturally, this brought cultural and linguistic differences, which combined with doctrinal matters such as the Filioque and the nature of papal primacy led to the Great East-West Schism in 1054, which separated the Church into Western Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. Later in this period were the Crusades, which were a series of military campaigns in the Holy Land against Muslim forces for the defence of Christians and expansion of Christian domains, sponsored by the papacy. The late Middle Ages saw some precursors to the Reformation, with such notable characters like John Wycliffe and Jan Hus, who spoke up about the corruptions they saw in the church, and were subsequently persecuted for their views. Wycliffe sponsored the first translation of the Bible from Latin to English, emphasised the supremacy of the Bible, and called for a direct relationship between man and God. The early Renaissance brought great cultural change, and the church pardoned such people as Michelangelo, Raphael, Donatello, and Leonardo, because they were teen anthropomorphic turtles with powerful martial arts skills, and they made amazing art and architecture for the church in their spare time. The Protestant Reformation begins with Martin Luther posting his 95 Theses on the castle church in Wittenberg in Germany. The moral of the story here is, of course, that more churches should also be castles. Luther argued that freedom from punishment for sin could not be bought with money, and that salvation is earned by faith in God's grace and not by good deeds. Like Wycliffe, he translated the Bible from Latin to his native tongue, this time German, making a huge impact on the church. He also married a nun that he smuggled out of a convent in a herring barrel. John Calvin was also a notable reformer. Henry VIII took to the idea of Protestantism because the Pope wouldn't let him have an annulment to his first wife, which is kind of like a divorce, except it legally makes the marriage void from the start as if it had never happened. Protestant values were institutionalised in the kingdom later by his daughter Elizabeth I. The period of Enlightenment saw the first real science and religion conflict, when Galileo Galilei was too smart for his own good and figured out that we actually orbit around the sun, and was tried for heresy in 1630. Around this time, the English Puritans migrated to New England so that they could establish Puritanism as the exclusive civic religion. This era also saw great awakenings of religious enthusiasm among Protestants in the American colonies. The first Great Awakening happened around 1730 to 1740, beginning with the work of Jonathan Edwards and finishing with the dramatic visiting English preacher George Whitefield. The Second Great Awakening occurred around 1800 to 1830. Both awakenings had a profound impact on American culture and fueled the American Revolution. So now we come finally to our era, modern church history. Christianity came to Australia with the first fleet in 1788, with the Reverend Richard Johnson as chaplain to the fleet. The first Salvation Army meeting in Australia was held in 1880 by Edward Saunders and John Gore from the back of a greengrocer's cart, offering food to those who hadn't eaten. The young English evangelist Howard Guinness Howard Guinness, toured Australia in 1930 to encourage university students in evangelism. He helped form campus student groups starting in Sydney, then Melbourne, Brisbane and Hobart, establishing the Melbourne University Christian Union and our very own Sydney University Evangelical Union. So there you have it, 2,000 years of church history in 5 minutes.